The reception hall glittered with crystal chandeliers and champagne flutes as my sister Catherine's wedding celebration reached its peak. I stood near the dessert table, nursing a glass of sparkling water, watching my family work the room with practiced ease. Every few minutes, someone would glance my way with a mixture of pity and embarrassment, as if my mere presence was a social liability they had to manage. "That's Alexandra," I heard my Aunt Patricia whisper to a woman in an expensive pearl necklace. "Catherine's younger sister. Such a shame she couldn't make anything of herself. The family's tried everything, but some people just don't have ambition." I took another sip of water and checked my phone. 11:47 p.m. The Wall Street Journal Sunday edition went live online at midnight. My publicist had confirmed the embargo lift time 3 days ago. 13 minutes until the article published. Catherine appeared at my elbow, radiant in her custom wedding gown. Her smile was tight around the edges as she guided me slightly away from the main cluster of guests. "Alex, could you maybe stay near the back for the rest of the evening?" Her tone was apologetic but firm. "Richard's parents are very traditional, very accomplished. His father is a federal judge, his mother is a hospital administrator. They're asking questions about you and it's just awkward." "Awkward," I repeated neutrally. "You know what I mean." Catherine glanced over her shoulder at her new in-laws, who were indeed watching us with poorly concealed curiosity. "They asked what you do and I didn't know what to say. You're 26 and you don't have a real job, you don't have an apartment, you barely own anything. It looks bad for the family." "I see. Mom suggested I tell people you're taking time to find yourself," Catherine continued, lowering her voice. "But Richard's mother is very practical. She doesn't understand finding yourself as a career choice. So I just said you were between opportunities. That sounds better than unemployed, right?" I smiled slightly. "Much better. Don't be like that." Catherine's expression shifted to frustration. "You could have tried harder, Alex. You have a degree from a good school. Dad offered to get you an interview at his firm. Uncle James said he could find you something in marketing. But you turned down every opportunity and now here we are at my wedding, and I have to explain why my little sister is a professional failure." "Is that what you told them?" I asked. "That I'm a professional failure?" Catherine had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I said you hadn't found your path yet. But yes, Richard's family is very success-oriented. They wanted to know about everyone's accomplishments. David just made vice president at his investment bank. Cousin Michelle is a partner at her consulting firm. And you're between jobs," I supplied. "Exactly." Catherine looked relieved that I understood. "So if you could just keep a low profile for the rest of the night, that would really help. Maybe leave before the after party? Richard's colleagues are all coming and they're all very successful." She swept away before I could respond, immediately resuming her role as the perfect bride, laughing at someone's joke with practiced charm. I checked my phone again. 11:51 p.m. 9 minutes. My mother materialized beside me, elegant in her mother-of-the-bride dress. "Alexandra, sweetheart, why are you hiding over here?" Her voice carried that particular tone of cheerful disappointment she'd perfected over the past few years. "Come meet some of Catherine's new family. Though perhaps don't mention the job situation. We're telling people you're exploring your options." "Exploring my options," I echoed. "That's creative. Well, what should we say?" Mom's smile faltered. "That you've been unemployed for 3 years? That you spend all your time traveling to who knows where, doing who knows what? That would be honest, but it's not exactly impressive dinner conversation." "I suppose not. Your father and I have been very patient," Mom continued. "We supported you through college, we gave you time to figure out what you wanted. But at some point, darling, you need to actually do something. Look at Catherine, she's a senior marketing director at a Fortune 500 company. Look at your cousins, your friends from school. They all have careers, apartments, lives. What do you have?" I took another sip of water and didn't answer. Mom sighed. "Richard's parents asked about you. His father wanted to know what field you were in. I said you were in business development, which sounds respectable enough, but then his mother asked which company and I had to change the subject. It was mortifying, Alexandra. At my own daughter's wedding." "I'm sorry you were mortified," I said quietly. "I just don't understand what happened to you," Mom said, her voice dropping to a more genuine tone of concern. "You were so bright in school. Such potential. And now you're 26 years old with nothing to show for it. No career, no prospects, no stability. What are you going to do with your life? 11:54 p.m. 6 minutes. I should probably get some air, I said, moving toward the reception hall's terrace doors. Don't disappear, Mom called after me. We're cutting the cake soon and Catherine wants family photos. Try to smile and look successful at least for the pictures. The terrace was blessedly quiet, overlooking the venue's manicured gardens. City lights twinkled in the distance. I leaned against the stone balustrade and opened my phone's browser, navigating to the Wall Street Journal's website. The current front page showed yesterday's headlines. In 6 minutes that would change. Behind me I heard the terrace doors open. My father stepped out, loosening his bow tie slightly. He spotted me and his expression shifted to that particular blend of disappointment and resignation I'd grown accustomed to. Your mother sent me to find you, he said, joining me at the railing. She's worried you're going to leave early and make Catherine upset. I wouldn't want to upset Catherine on her special day, I said. Dad was quiet for a moment, staring out at the garden. You know, when you were younger I thought you'd be the one we'd be celebrating like this. You were always the smartest one. The most driven. I thought you'd take the business world by storm. Things don't always work out the way we expect. No, he agreed. They don't. But Alex, this isn't about expectations anymore. This is about basic responsibility. You're living off savings from a college graduation gift, staying in hostels and cheap hotels, doing God knows what with your time. That's not a life. That's prolonged adolescence. I checked my phone. 11:57 p.m. 3 minutes. I've tried to be supportive, Dad continued. I've tried to give you space to figure things out. But tonight, standing in that reception hall with all those accomplished people, having to explain that my youngest daughter is essentially unemployed and directionless. It's hard, Alex. It reflects on all of us. I understand. Do you? His voice gained an edge. Because from where I'm standing it looks like you don't care. You show up to your sister's wedding in an off-the-rack dress, no date, no career to speak of, and you act like everything's fine. It's not fine. You're 26 years old and you're wasting your life. The terrace doors opened again. This time it was Catherine, followed by Richard and his parents. Catherine looked annoyed to find me out here. There you are, she said. We're taking family photos. Alex, can you at least try to look presentable? She turned to Richard's parents with an apologetic smile. I'm so sorry. My sister isn't great at following social cues. Richard's father, the federal judge, regarded me with polite curiosity. Catherine mentioned you're in business development? What industry? Before I could answer, Catherine jumped in. She's actually between positions right now. Exploring opportunities. I see, the judge said, his tone neutral but his eyes reflecting exactly what he thought of someone who was exploring opportunities at 26. Richard's mother, the hospital administrator, smiled with practiced sympathy. That must be challenging. The job market is so competitive these days. Have you considered going back to school? Sometimes additional credentials can help. I have considered it, I said politely. 11:59 p.m. 1 minute. Well, I'm sure you'll find something eventually, Richard's mother said with the kind of encouragement people give to lost causes. Catherine told us you've been traveling quite a bit? That must be nice, having the freedom to explore before settling down into a career. It's been very educational, I agreed. Catherine shot me a warning look. We should really get back inside for those photos. My phone buzzed in my hand. I glanced at the screen. 12 a.m. The Wall Street Journal's website refreshed. The new front page loaded. The main headline appeared in large, bold text. The Shadow Billionaire. How a 26-year-old built a tech empire in secret. Below it, a professional photograph I'd sat for 2 weeks ago. Below that, the sub-headline, Alexandra Chen's stealth startup revolutionizes cybersecurity, valued at $3.2 billion in latest funding round. I looked up from my phone to find 6 pairs of eyes staring at me expectantly, waiting for me to follow them back inside for photographs where I would smile and try to look successful despite being the family disappointment. Actually, I said calmly, there's something you all should probably see. I held out my phone, showing them the Wall Street Journal's front page. My photograph stared back at them from the screen. For a long moment nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They simply stared at the phone, then at me, then back at the phone, as if their brains couldn't quite process the connection between the two images. Catherine found her voice first. Is that a joke? Is this photoshopped? It's the Wall Street Journal, I said. They don't Photoshop their front page stories. Dad took the phone from my hand with trembling fingers. His eyes scanned the article, moving faster and faster as he read. The color drained from his face. This says. He stopped, swallowed hard, started again. This says you're the founder and CEO of Sentinel Technologies. That you developed a revolutionary AI-driven cybersecurity platform that's now protecting 70% of Fortune 500 companies. 73% as of last month, I corrected gently. We signed 3 new contracts last week. Mom leaned over Dad's shoulder, reading the screen. Her hand went to her mouth. It says your company is worth over $3 billion. Says you're worth. Alexandra, it says your personal net worth is estimated at $1.4 billion. That's conservative, I said. My financial advisors put it closer to $1.6 billion after the last funding round. Complete silence on the terrace. Inside, I could hear the wedding band playing, guests laughing, the clink of champagne glasses. Out here, 6 people stood frozen, trying to reconcile what they'd believed about me with what they were reading on the screen. Richard's father, the judge, was the first to recover. This is from today? This just published. About 2 minutes ago, I confirmed. The embargo lifted at midnight. By tomorrow morning, it'll be in the print edition. CNN is running a segment at 6 a.m. Bloomberg at 7. CNBC is doing a full-hour special tomorrow afternoon. But Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. You said you were traveling. You said you didn't have a job. You let us think. I said I was traveling for work, I corrected. You assumed that meant I was unemployed and backpacking through Europe. I was actually meeting with clients, investors, and strategic partners in 14 countries. And I never said I didn't have a job. You just never asked what my job actually was. You lied to us, Catherine said, her voice rising. I answered every question you asked honestly, I replied. When you asked what I did, I said I worked in technology and security. When you asked why I traveled so much, I said it was for business meetings. You heard what you wanted to hear. Dad was still scrolling through the article, his face growing paler with each paragraph. This says you started the company 4 years ago with $200,000 you raised from angel investors. That you developed the core technology yourself. That you now have 800 employees across 4 continents. 940 employees as of last week, I said. We just opened a new development center in Singapore. Mom's hands were shaking. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us believe that you were a failure? I supplied. Because that's what you wanted to believe. It was easier to assume I was directionless than to ask questions about what I was actually doing. Every time I came home, you made jokes about me being unemployed. You told your friends I was finding myself. You introduced me as your daughter who hasn't quite figured things out yet. I stopped correcting you after a while. Richard's mother found her voice. But the way you're dressed, the way you act, you don't look like a billionaire CEO. What does a billionaire CEO look like? I asked, genuinely curious. This is a reception dress I bought because Catherine wanted everyone to wear cocktail attire. I don't generally attend weddings in business suits. And I act like myself, which is apparently disappointing to some people, but it's authentic. Inside the reception hall, I could see guests starting to check their phones. The Wall Street Journal article was beginning to circulate on social media. Within minutes, everyone at the wedding would know. Catherine seemed to realize this at the same moment. Her face went from pale to red. Everyone's going to see this. Everyone's going to know that I told them you were unemployed. That we treated you like a failure, I finished. Yes, they're going to know that. You did this on purpose, Catherine said, anger breaking through her shock. You timed this to drop during my wedding. You're trying to ruin my special day. Your wedding is on Saturday, I said calmly. The Wall Street Journal always releases its Sunday edition at midnight on Saturday. I didn't choose the timing, the editorial calendar did. Though I admit the synchronicity is somewhat poetic. Dad was still holding my phone, still reading, his expression shifting between shock, confusion, and something that might have been shame. You testified before Congress last year. You met with the Secretary of Defense. You've advised the White House on cybersecurity policy. 3 times, I confirmed. Most recently about protecting critical infrastructure from state-sponsored attacks. And you never mentioned it, Mom said. Not once. You came home for Thanksgiving and let us make jokes about you needing to find a real job, and you never said a word. What would you have believed? I asked. If I'd told you at Thanksgiving that I was advising the White House, would you have taken me seriously? Or would you have assumed I was exaggerating, trying to make myself sound more important than I was? Neither of them answered. The terrace doors burst open. My cousin David appeared, phone in hand, eyes wide. Alex, tell me this isn't real. Tell me you didn't actually. He stopped, seeing everyone's faces. Oh my God. Real. You're actually a billionaire, I finished. Yes, David. I'm actually a billionaire. Behind him, more family members were emerging onto the terrace, all holding phones, all wearing expressions of shock and disbelief. Aunt Patricia, Uncle James, Cousin Michelle. They crowded around, voices overlapping. The Wall Street Journal says, your company is worth billions. You're on the Forbes list. How did we not know? I let them babble, watching the reality sink in. Inside the reception hall, I could see more guests checking their phones, pointing, looking around for me. The news was spreading like wildfire through the wedding. Catherine's wedding planner appeared, looking frazzled. Ms. Chin? There are reporters at the front gate. 3 news crews just arrived. They're asking for Alexandra Chin. Should I call security? That would be my security team, I said. I asked them to stay outside unless I needed them. Let them know everything's fine. The reporters can wait. Your security team, Catherine repeated numbly. I'm worth over $1 billion, I said. My board insisted on proper security after we went public with our Series D funding. There have been threats, kidnapping concerns, the usual complications that come with highly visible wealth. My phone started buzzing continuously with incoming notifications. I took it back from my father and silenced it. I have 43 missed calls, I observed. CNN, NBC, CBS, Fox Business, Bloomberg, Forbes, Fortune, TechCrunch, and about a dozen others. Plus 217 text messages. My publicist is probably having a heart attack right now. I told her I'd be unavailable during my sister's wedding, but I don't think she anticipated this level of immediate response. Your publicist, Mom echoed faintly. Margaret Hayes, formerly VP of Communications at Tesla. She's very good. Expensive but worth it. I glanced at my phone again. She's texted me 14 times in the past 3 minutes. Apparently the article is trending #1 worldwide on social media. The hashtag #ShadowBillionaire is already viral. Uncle James stepped forward, his earlier condescension replaced by calculating interest. Alex, sweetheart, we should talk. I have some investment opportunities that might interest someone with your kind of capital. No, I said simply. But you haven't even heard. No, I repeated. I have a team of financial advisors who handle investment decisions based on rigorous analysis and strategic planning. I don't make billion-dollar decisions at family weddings based on pitches from relatives who called me directionless 3 hours ago. He flinched like I'd slapped him. Aunt Patricia tried a different approach, her voice dripping with sudden warmth. Alexandra, darling, I had no idea you were doing such important work. If I'd known, I would have been so supportive. You must tell us all about it. How did you get started? What inspired you? You asked me about my work at Christmas, I said. I told you I was developing cybersecurity software. You laughed and said that sounded like something teenagers do in their basements. So I stopped explaining. Her smile froze. Inside, the band had stopped playing. The wedding guests were clustering near the terrace doors, phones out, trying to get a glimpse of the suddenly famous family member. I could hear whispers, see pointing fingers. Catherine stood in the center of the terrace, still in her wedding gown, tears starting to stream down her face. You ruined it, she whispered. This was supposed to be my day. My moment. And you made it about you. I didn't make it about anything, I said. The Wall Street Journal published a major business story on its regular schedule. That's not something I controlled. But everyone's going to remember this wedding as the night your sister turned out to be a secret billionaire, Catherine said, her voice breaking. Not as my special day. As the night you revealed you were better than all of us. I'm not better than anyone, I said quietly. I'm just successful at something you didn't bother to ask about. Richard stepped forward, putting a protective arm around Catherine. His earlier friendly demeanor had vanished, replaced by something harder. I think you should leave. You've caused enough disruption. I was planning to leave anyway, I said. After the family photos Catherine insisted on. But under the circumstances, I don't think those will be happening. No, Catherine said bitterly. They won't. Get out, Alex. Go back to your billion-dollar company and your secret life and leave us alone. I nodded slowly. Hey. Congratulations on your marriage, Catherine. I hope it's everything you dreamed of. I walked toward the terrace doors. The crowd of guests parted like water, everyone staring, phones still recording. I could imagine the social media posts already being crafted. Was at a wedding when we discovered one of the guests was a secret billionaire. My father's voice stopped me at the doors. Alexandra. Wait. I turned. He stood at the center of the terrace, still holding my phone, displaying the Wall Street Journal article, looking 10 years older than he had an hour ago. I'm sorry, he said. We're sorry. We should have believed in you. We should have asked more questions. We should have. He trailed off, unable to find the words. You should have treated me like I mattered even when you thought I was unsuccessful, I said. That's what you should have done. But you didn't. You measured my worth by your definition of success, and when I didn't meet it, you decided I was worth less than the rest of the family. That's not fair, Mom protested. We were trying to motivate you. You were trying to shame me into conforming to what you thought my life should look like, I interrupted. There's a difference. Motivation comes from belief. What you gave me was disappointment dressed up as concern. I opened the terrace doors. Outside, I could see my security team moving into position. The black SUVs were pulling up to the front entrance. News vans lined the street beyond the venue gates. The thing about being dismissed and underestimated, I said, addressing the entire family gathered on that terrace, is that it teaches you who people really are when you have nothing they want. Now that you know I have something you want, money, connections, success, you'll all suddenly remember that you always believed in me, that you always saw my potential, that you were always supportive. I met my father's eyes. But I'll remember tonight. I'll remember that when you thought I was nobody, you treated me like I was nobody. And that tells me everything I need to know about what your support is worth. I walked through the reception hall. Guests pressed back against the walls, watching me pass. Some tried to speak. Alexandra, wait, I wanted to talk about. But I kept walking. At the front entrance, Marcus, my head of security, was waiting with two of his team. Miss Chen. We have a situation. Multiple news crews, approximately 50+ photographers, and a crowd of onlookers. We can take you out the back service entrance if you prefer to avoid them. No, I said. I'll go out the front. Are you sure? It's going to be chaotic. Let them see me, I said. Let them get their photos. The article's already out. There's no point in hiding. Marcus nodded and spoke into his radio. Primary is moving to front exit. Everyone in position. The doors opened and I stepped into a wall of camera flashes and shouted questions. Miss Chen, how does it feel to be exposed as a billionaire? Miss Chen, did your family really not know about your company? Miss Chen, can you comment on reports that you're the youngest female tech billionaire? Miss Chen, is it true you started your company in a garage? I paused at the top of the steps, security forming a protective semicircle around me. Behind me I could see wedding guests crowding the windows, filming on their phones. Catherine's special day had indeed become about something else entirely. I'll make one statement, I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. The reporters fell silent, cameras focusing. I built my company over 4 years through hard work, innovative technology, and an exceptional team. I chose to keep my success private because I valued my privacy and wanted to focus on the work rather than the publicity. The Wall Street Journal article reveals details about my company and my journey. That's all I have to say tonight. Thank you. But Miss Chen, what about your family? That's all I have to say tonight, I repeated firmly. Marcus guided me to the waiting SUV. I slid into the back seat and the door closed, muffling the shouts and camera clicks. The vehicle pulled away from the venue, security car in front, second security car behind. My phone buzzed again. I looked at the screen. Margaret had sent a message. You're trending in 47 countries. CNN wants you live at 6 a.m. Fox Business is offering a primetime special. Forbes wants to move your cover feature to next week's issue. Call me ASAP. Another message, this one from my CFO. Stock market's going to be interesting Monday. Our clients are thrilled about the publicity. Board wants an emergency meeting. Another from my head of HR. We've had 2,400 job applications in the past hour. Our careers website crashed. In a good way. I turned off my phone and leaned back against the seat, watching the city lights blur past the window. Where to, Ms. Chin? The driver asked. Your hotel. The office, I said. I have a feeling Monday is going to be intense. I should prepare. It's after midnight on Saturday, Marcus pointed out. You should rest. I'll rest tomorrow, I said. Tonight I need to think. The SUV headed toward downtown, toward the gleaming high-rise that housed Sentinel Technologies headquarters. My company. My creation. The thing I'd built while my family dismissed me as directionless. My phone buzzed one more time before I could fully shut it down. A text from Catherine. I hate you for this. I stared at the message for a long moment, then replied, I know. I'm sorry it happened at your wedding. But I'm not sorry for my success. I added one more line. I hope someday you'll be proud of me instead of embarrassed by me. But if not, I'll be okay. I don't need your approval anymore. The message delivered. I turned off the phone completely. Through the SUV's window I could see my reflection in the glass. Same person I'd been this morning. Same person I'd been 4 years ago when I'd started this journey. The only thing that had changed was that now everyone else knew what I'd been doing while they weren't paying attention. The SUV pulled into the underground garage of my building. I took the private elevator to the top floor, where my office occupied the entire corner suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. My awards and patents lined one wall. Photos with world leaders and industry icons hung on another. This was my real life. The one my family never bothered to ask about. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. Email inbox. 1,847 unread messages. Slack notifications. 492. Calendar requests. 63. Tomorrow I would deal with all of it. The interviews, the publicity, the sudden flood of people who wanted a piece of my story. Tonight, I let myself feel what I'd been holding back on that terrace at Catherine's wedding. Not triumph. Not vindication. Just a quiet, tired sadness that it had come to this. That my family's love and respect had been conditional on their perception of my success. That they'd only valued me once the world told them I was valuable. But also something else. Something stronger. Relief. Relief that I no longer had to pretend. Relief that I could finally stop answering vague questions with vaguer answers. Relief that I'd proven, at least to myself, that I didn't need their belief to succeed. The city stretched out below my windows, millions of lights twinkling in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Catherine's wedding was probably still going, guests gossiping about the dramatic revelation. Somewhere out there, my parents were trying to process how they'd gotten everything so wrong. Somewhere out there, news fans were preparing their morning segments about the shadow billionaire who'd been hiding in plain sight. And here in this office, surrounded by evidence of what I'd built while they weren't watching, I finally let myself acknowledge the truth. I didn't need them to believe in me anymore. I'd learned to believe in myself. And that, in the end, was worth more than all the family approval in the world. My phone, despite being turned off, somehow buzzed one final time. A message that must have been delayed in delivery. From my father. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. Please. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I closed the laptop, stood up and walked to the window. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Media scrutiny. Family complications. The inevitable requests for money, for connections, for access. But tonight, I was just a 26-year-old woman who'd built something extraordinary while everyone around her insisted she was building nothing. And finally, the world knew the truth. The question was, would it have been better if my family had believed in me all along? Or was this hard-earned, self-sufficient, independently validated success, somehow more meaningful because I'd achieved it without their faith? I didn't have an answer. But standing in my corner office, looking out over the city I'd conquered while my family thought I was lost, I realized something important. I didn't need an answer. I just needed to keep building. And tomorrow that's exactly what I would do.
The crystal ballroom of the Rosewood Hotel sparkled with 1,000 points of light, each crystal chandelier casting rainbow prisms across the faces of elegantly dressed guests. I stood in the shadows near the entrance, watching the scene unfold before me like some bizarre theater production. The bride, my sister Olivia, floated through the crowd in her designer wedding gown, accepting congratulations with practiced grace. Our parents, George and Margaret Wilson, followed in her wake like proud satellites, their faces glowing with the kind of joy they'd never shown for me. "Just sign here, Ms. Martinez," the wedding coordinator whispered, extending a tablet with the final payment authorization for the venue. I suppressed a smile at the false name I'd used to purchase the Rosewood Hotel chain 3 years ago. If only they knew that Elena Martinez, the mysterious hotel magnate, was actually Elena Wilson, the daughter they declared dead a decade ago. I scrawled my signature and handed back the tablet, adjusting the elegant mask that covered the upper half of my face. The masquerade theme had been Olivia's idea, though I doubted she realized how perfectly it served my purpose. Behind their own masks, not even my parents recognized the daughter they'd erased. The ceremony was beautiful, I murmured to the coordinator, my voice carrying the slight Spanish accent I'd cultivated for my Elena Martinez persona. "Your staff has done an excellent job." She beamed at the praise, unaware that I signed her paychecks. "Thank you, Ms. Martinez. We're so honored you came personally to oversee the Wilson wedding. They're one of Boston's most prominent families, you know." I knew all too well. The Wilsons had been Boston aristocracy for generations, their shipping empire dating back to the 1800s. That legacy of success and perfection had been everything to my parents, and the reason they found it so easy to erase their defective daughter. My crime? Refusing to marry the man they'd chosen for me, the heir to a rival shipping company. At 22, fresh out of business school with dreams of modernizing the family company, I dared to suggest that arranged marriages were outdated. That maybe the shipping industry needed innovation more than it needed mergers through matrimony. The argument that followed still echoed in my nightmares. My father's rage, my mother's cold disappointment, and finally the ultimatum: marry Jonathan Porter or be cut off completely. I chose freedom. The next morning, I emptied my trust fund, a mere $50,000 they'd forgotten to freeze, and disappeared. I spent the first month in a cheap motel, teaching myself everything I could about modern business practices, digital transformation, and venture capital. I changed my appearance, adopted a new accent, and built Elena Martinez from scratch. What I didn't know then was that my parents had chosen to deal with my departure in the most dramatic way possible. Instead of admitting their daughter had defied them, they told everyone I died in a sailing accident off the coast. They even held a funeral, complete with an empty casket and tearful eulogies about their beloved Elena, taken too soon. I learned about my own death 6 months later when I tried to contact my younger sister. The email I sent bounced back, but not before I saw her social media profile picture, Olivia in black, standing beside our parents at my memorial service. That was the moment Elena Wilson truly died and Elena Martinez was born. "Ms. Martinez?" The coordinator's voice pulled me back to the present. "Would you like to be seated for dinner?" I nodded, following her to a table near the back of the ballroom. Close enough to observe everything, far enough to maintain my cover. The irony of paying for my sister's wedding venue and owning the mansion our parents still lived in wasn't lost on me. Over the past decade, I'd systematically purchased every property the Wilsons used, every hotel they frequented, and a controlling interest in most of their business partners. They just didn't know it yet. My father's voice suddenly carried across the room, loud enough to reach my table. "Everyone, if I could have your attention, please." The crowd quieted as George Wilson raised his champagne glass. He cut an impressive figure in his tuxedo, silver hair gleaming under the chandeliers. 10 years had added distinguished lines to his face, but hadn't diminished his commanding presence. "Today is a day of joy, celebrating the marriage of my only daughter, Olivia, to the love of her life." Only daughter. The words hit like a physical blow, even after all these years. "But it's also a day tinged with bittersweetness," he continued, his voice thick with practiced emotion. "I can't help but think of our beloved Elena, Olivia's sister, who left us far too soon. She would have loved to see this day." Beside him, my mother dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. The perfect breathing mother still mourning her lost child. If only they knew that lost child was sitting 30 feet away, controlling more wealth and power than the Wilson family had accumulated in 6 generations. A server appeared at my elbow. "More champagne, Ms. Martinez?" I accepted the glass, using the moment to collect myself. I hadn't come here for revenge, or at least, that's what I told myself. I'd built my empire through genuine innovation, transforming struggling businesses into modern powerhouses. The fact that I now controlled most of my family's business interests was just convenient. Such a shame about their older daughter. The elderly woman seated beside me whispered, clearly hoping to share gossip with the mysterious hotel owner. The poor girl died in a sailing accident. They say she was quite troubled before the end, defying her parents, refusing a brilliant marriage match. Some even whispered she might have, you know. She made a vague gesture. Done it on purpose. My fingers tightened around the champagne flute. Of course they'd implied my death was suicide. It fit their narrative of the rebellious daughter who couldn't handle the pressure of their expectations. Better than admitting the truth, that I'd chosen freedom over their suffocating control. The sound of clinking glass drew everyone's attention. Olivia had stood to make her own speech, her new husband beaming beside her. My little sister had grown into a stunning woman, though her beauty had a brittle quality that reminded me of our mother. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice carrying the same finishing school polish I'd once been forced to learn. "As Father said, this day is perfect in almost every way. The only thing missing is my dear sister Elena." I took a slow sip of champagne, watching her performance. Elena was more than my big sister. She was my best friend, my protector, my role model. Olivia's voice wavered perfectly. "When we were little, she used to tell me that anything was possible if you were brave enough to chase your dreams. I just wish," she paused for dramatic effect, "I just wish she could see that I finally found my dream." The crowd murmured sympathetically. I fought the urge to laugh. Olivia had been 12 when I left, old enough to understand exactly what our parents had done. She'd chosen their side, happily stepping into the role of perfect only daughter. The sister who'd supposedly been her best friend hadn't even raided a phone call to warn me about my impending death. As dinner was served, I found myself studying the head table. My parents sat there with Olivia and her new husband, along with his equally wealthy family. They looked like something out of a society magazine. Perfectly groomed, perfectly poised, perfectly false. 10 years ago, their perfect facade had crushed me. Now I saw them clearly, small people desperately clinging to outdated power, unaware that the world had changed around them. The shipping industry they dominated for generations was transforming, and they hadn't adapted. Their empire was crumbling, propped up only by the secret investments I'd made through shell companies. "Ms. Martinez?" A man in an expensive suit approached my table. I recognized him as James Porter, my almost father-in-law, though he aged considerably. "I hope you're enjoying the evening. I must say, we were surprised and honored when we heard you'd be attending personally." I smiled behind my mask. "I make it a point to oversee special events at my flagship properties, Mr. Porter, especially for such distinguished families." He preened at the compliment. "Yes, well, the Wilsons and Porters have been pillars of Boston society for generations. Though I must admit, recent years have been challenging." "Oh." I kept my tone merely polite, though I knew exactly how challenging things had been for both families. My companies had slowly acquired controlling interests in their major shipping routes, modernizing operations and squeezing their profit margins. "The industry isn't what it used to be," he said, sighing heavily. "These tech startups, these modern logistics companies, they're disrupting everything. Why, just last month we lost our biggest client to some upstart called Phoenix Maritime." I managed not to smile. Phoenix Maritime was one of my first acquisitions, transformed from a failing local shipper into a digital logistics powerhouse. "Progress can be difficult to navigate," I offered diplomatically. "Progress," he scoffed. "In my day, business was built on relationships, on family connections. Did you know my son was supposed to marry George Wilson's older daughter? Now that would have been a merger worth celebrating. But the girl had other ideas." He shook his head. "Tragic. What happened to her? Though perhaps for the best, given her rebellious nature." The crystal flute in my hand threatened to shatter under my grip. Before I could respond, a commotion at the head table drew everyone's attention. My mother had stood up suddenly, swaying slightly. Apparently the champagne had flowed too freely. I simply must say, she announced, her voice carrying that peculiar precision of the elegantly drunk. How wonderful it is to see all our dear friends here, especially those who supported us after we lost our Elena. I sat perfectly still, watching the train wreck unfold. Such a difficult time, she continued, dabbing at her eyes. Having to tell everyone that our daughter, that she, well, the shame of it all. But we preserved the family name, didn't we, George? We gave her a proper send-off, even if she didn't deserve. Margaret. My father's voice cut through her rambling like a steel blade. Perhaps you should sit down. But the champagne had loosened something in my mother's perfect facade. Oh, but darling, I simply must tell Ms. Martinez what an honor it is to have her here. Such a successful woman, and self-made at that. Nothing at all like our poor Elena, who thought she could reject her family obligations and succeed on her own. She laughed, the sound brittle as breaking glass. As if a Wilson could ever survive without family connections. Why ever she didn't even make it a month before. That's enough. My father stood, his face flushed with anger. Margaret, you're making a scene. The ballroom had gone silent, hundreds of guests watching my mother's meltdown with horrified fascination. Olivia was hiding her face in her hands, her new husband patting her shoulder awkwardly. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the marble floor. The sound drew my mother's attention, and she focused on me with the unsettling intensity of the truly drunk. Ms. Martinez, she called out, you simply must tell us your secret. How does a woman with no family name, no connections, build such an empire? My Elena thought she could do the same, you know. Thought she was smarter than generations of Wilson business sense. And now she's what, mother? The words left my mouth before I could stop them, my careful accent slipping. My mother froze, something flickering across her face. Recognition, impossible as it was. But the moment passed. She blinked at me owlishly, confused by the question from a stranger. My father had reached her by then, taking her arm firmly. I apologize for my wife, he said smoothly. The excitement of the day combined with the memories. Please, everyone, enjoy your dinner. He led my mother away, probably to sleep off the champagne in one of the hotel's luxury suites. Suites I owned, in a hotel I owned, just like I owned the mansion they still lived in and controlling interest in the companies they thought were still theirs. I sank back into my chair, hands trembling slightly. I come too close to revealing myself, letting old pain override a decade of careful planning. The elderly woman beside me patted my arm sympathetically. Don't mind them, dear, she said. Old money families like the Wilsons, they can't handle change. Today's world belongs to people like you, self-made, forward-thinking. Why, I heard your hotel chain is expanding into shipping and logistics now. Among other things, I murmured, recovering my accent. She had no idea that my hotel chain was just the tip of the iceberg. Through various shell corporations and holding companies, Elena Martinez controlled an empire worth billions, built specifically to systematically dismantle everything the Wilsons had ever valued. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of small talk and subtle observation. I watched my sister dance with her new husband, my father smooth things over with embarrassed guests, my mother nowhere to be seen. They looked exactly like what they were, relics of a dying era, clinging to appearances while their real power slipped away. When I finally stood to leave, the wedding coordinator rushed over. Ms. Martinez, will you be staying the night? We've prepared the presidential suite. No, I said quietly, watching my father lead a round of toasts. I think I've seen enough family drama for one evening. She laughed nervously, clearly uncertain how to respond to her boss's dry tone. I handed her a thick envelope, a wedding gift for my sister, though she'd never know who it was really from. Make sure the bride and groom have everything they need, I instructed, and send some water and aspirin to Mrs. Wilson's room. She'll need it tomorrow. As I walked out of the crystal ballroom, I heard my father's voice one last time, to family, the most precious thing we have. I didn't turn around. Elena Wilson was dead, after all. They'd made sure of that themselves. But Elena Martinez was very much alive, and she was just getting started. In my car, I pulled out my phone and dialed my assistant. Maya, execute phase 2. It's time the Wilsons learned exactly who they're dealing with. The next few weeks would change everything. But that's another part of the story. The morning after Olivia's wedding, I sat in my penthouse office overlooking Boston Harbor, watching the Wilson shipping vessels crawl across the water like tiny, obsolete insects. My mother's drunken outburst had accelerated my timeline, but perhaps that was for the best. 10 years of silent accumulation had positioned all the pieces perfectly. Now it was time to play the game. The numbers are in from last night, Maya announced, entering with her tablet. My assistant of 8 years was the only person who knew both Elena Martinez and Elena Wilson. The Wilson Porter wedding cost them just over $300,000. They put it all on credit. I nodded, unsurprised. And their current financial position? Critical. Maya pulled up detailed spreadsheets. Wilson Shipping's quarterly losses have hit $12 million. They've mortgaged everything they own, which technically means they've mortgaged everything you own since you hold all their properties through shell companies. They're 3 months behind on payments to Phoenix Maritime, which means they're 3 months behind on payments to me. I finished. What about the Porter merger they're counting on? James Porter's company isn't in much better shape. The merger would be like tying two stones together and expecting them to float. I smiled, remembering James Porter's condescending comments at the wedding. The man who'd once thought himself worthy of arranging my marriage was now drowning in debt, his company hemorrhaging clients to my more efficient operations. Send notices to all their major clients, I instructed. It's time for Phoenix Maritime to raise its rates. Let's see how many stay loyal to outdated shipping methods when modern logistics could save them millions. Maya made a note, then hesitated. There's something else. Your father has called an emergency board meeting for Wilson Shipping tomorrow morning. Finally, I've been waiting for this moment, carefully orchestrating it through a decade of strategic moves. Prepare the paperwork. It's time for Elena Martinez to make her first public appearance at Wilson Shipping. Are you sure? Maya's concern was evident. Once you start this. They buried their daughter to save face, I said quietly. Now they'll learn exactly what that decision cost them. The next morning, I dressed with particular care, a blood-red Armani suit that projected power, Louboutin heels that clicked like weapons on marble floors, and a small gold compass pendant that had once belonged to my grandmother. The only Wilson who had truly loved me. The Wilson Shipping headquarters hadn't changed in 10 years. The same imposing granite building, the same brass nameplate declaring founded 1847. The same portrait of my great-grandfather glowering in the lobby. But there was an undercurrent of tension today. Nervous whispers and darting glances as employees noticed my arrival. Ms. Martinez. The receptionist jumped to attention. We weren't expecting. That is, the board meeting is private. Not anymore. I handed her a thick envelope. My credentials. As the majority shareholder of Phoenix Maritime and holder of significant Wilson Shipping debt, I have every right to attend. Her hands shook as she verified the paperwork. I watched her face pale as she realized exactly how much power Elena Martinez wielded. Of course. 14th floor boardroom. The elevator ride gave me a moment to center myself. In my ear, Maya's voice provided updates through a discreet earpiece. All board members present. Your father's trying to push through an emergency restructuring plan. He still thinks he can save the company without outside help. The boardroom doors were heavy oak, stretching from floor to ceiling. I paused for a moment, hearing familiar voices through the wood. Can't accept these terms, my father was saying. Phoenix Maritime is trying to steal our company piece by piece. We don't have a choice, George, another voice responded. We're bleeding clients, our ships are outdated, and this mysterious Elena Martinez owns half the ports we use. I pushed the doors open. The conversation died instantly. 12 men in expensive suits stared at me. Old money, old power, old ideas. At the head of the table, my father stood frozen mid-gesture, his face darkening as he recognized the woman who'd attended his daughter's wedding. Ms. Martinez, he managed finally. This is a private meeting. Not anymore. I strode to the table, my heels echoing in the silence. Please don't let me interrupt your discussion of my company's terms. Your company? He spat the words. Phoenix Maritime is nothing but an upstart using digital gimmicks to steal established clients. Wilson Shipping has survived for 6 generations and will survive for precisely 12 more days. I cut in smoothly. Unless you accept the merger terms I'm about to offer. I placed a folder on the table. Inside was the culmination of 10 years' work. documents proving my ownership of their buildings, their warehouses, their homes. Evidence of their mounting debts, their failed modernization attempts, their desperate efforts to maintain appearances while their empire crumbled. "This is impossible," my father whispered, flipping through pages. "These properties, our house, the hotel chain, all belong to me," I confirmed, "along with controlling interest in most of your remaining clients' companies. Face it, Mr. Wilson, you're not just losing, you've already lost." He slammed the folder down. "Who are you? Some tech billionaire trying to dismantle a legacy business. You have no idea what family tradition means." I felt my carefully constructed mask crack, just a little. Family tradition. I took off my designer sunglasses, meeting his eyes directly, like the tradition of forcing your children into loveless marriages, or the tradition of declaring them dead when they refuse to comply. The color drained from his face. "No," he whispered. "It's not possible." Elena, one of the older board members, breathed, recognition dawning. "My God, Elena Wilson." I smiled, not pleasantly. "Elena Martinez, actually. I took the name after you killed me. Makes for a better corporate image than being the dead daughter of a failing shipping magnate." Chaos erupted in the boardroom. Board members shouted questions. My father stumbled back into his chair, and somewhere in the building an emergency alarm began to wail. "Enough." My voice cut through the noise like a whip. "You have exactly 24 hours to accept the merger proposal. If you refuse, I call in all outstanding debts and sell your remaining assets to my subsidiaries. Your choice." I turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and father, you might want to check on mother. I hear she's still recovering from quite a spectacle at Olivia's wedding." Security guards burst in as I walked out, responding to some panic button my father had probably pressed. I smiled at them as I passed. They worked for me too, though they didn't know it yet. In the elevator, Maya's voice came through my earpiece. "Well, that was dramatic." "They always love theatrics," I replied. "I learned from the best. Your mother's waiting in the lobby." I stiffened. "What?" "She arrived about 5 minutes ago. Looks like she's mostly recovered from the champagne." The elevator doors opened, and there she was. Margaret Wilson, Boston society matron. Perfectly coiffed even in the middle of her world collapsing. She stood near the great-grandfather's portrait, and for a moment I saw myself at 18, standing in that same spot while she lectured me about family duty. "Ms. Martinez," she said as I approached, her voice brittle as frozen glass. Or should I say, "Elena will do." I cut her off. "But only in private. Publicly, I'm still very much dead. Your choice, as I recall." She flinched. "We did what we had to do. For the family name." "The family name?" I laughed, the sound echoing off marble walls. "Take a look around, mother. The Wilson name isn't worth the brass it's engraved on. The only thing keeping this company afloat is my money, which makes it my name on the line. You're enjoying this," she accused, "destroying everything we built." "No," I stepped closer, close enough to smell her familiar perfume. "I'm saving everything you destroyed. The company will survive, modernize, grow. The Wilson name will continue, just not in Wilson hands." Her perfectly painted lips trembled. We really thought you were dead, poverty-stricken, failed," I supplied. "You thought your rebellious daughter couldn't possibly succeed without the family's help. That's why you erased me, because the alternative was admitting you might be wrong." A tear slipped down her cheek, carving a path through expensive foundation. "Elena, please. We can fix this. Come home." "I'm not that naive girl anymore." I walked past her toward the entrance. "You have 24 hours to accept the merger. Don't worry, I'll let you keep the house. Consider it a wedding gift to Olivia." Outside, my driver held the car door. Boston's summer sun felt warm on my face, so different from the artificial chill of the Wilson building. I looked back once, seeing my mother's silhouette through the glass doors, small and lost in the lobby of her crumbling empire. Maya was waiting in the car. "Phase 2 complete," she reported. "The board is in chaos, our lawyers are standing by, and rumors already spreading through the financial district. What's our next move?" I checked my phone, seeing dozens of missed calls from my father, from board members, from family friends suddenly realizing who Elena Martinez really was. Let them talk. Let them panic. The next 24 hours would determine the fate of everything they'd built, and everything I'd built to replace it. Now, I said, we wait, and then we show them exactly what the dead daughter can do. The next phase would change everything. But that's another part of the story. The 24 hours I'd given the Wilson Shipping Board felt like the longest of my life. I spent them in my penthouse office, watching the sun set and rise again over Boston Harbor while my phone lit up with increasingly desperate messages. From my father, "We need to talk. This isn't the way." From various board members, "Let's discuss terms privately." From family friends, "Elena, darling, we never believed." From Olivia, surprisingly, "Is it really you?" I answered none of them. Instead, I focused on the final pieces of my plan, making sure every detail was perfect. The media had already caught wind of the story. Boston's supposedly dead heiress returning as a billionaire CEO to take over her family's company. The headlines wrote themselves. The Wall Street Journal is on line 1, Maya announced, entering with fresh coffee. They want an exclusive. Not yet. I took the coffee, breathing in its familiar comfort. Let them speculate for now. The real story comes after the board's decision. And if they refuse the merger? I smiled, remembering my mother's face in the lobby. They won't. Right on cue, my phone buzzed with a message from the board's secretary. The vote was in. Unanimous acceptance of Phoenix Maritime's merger terms. My father hadn't even voted against it. Perhaps he finally recognized the inevitable. Set up the press conference, I told Maya. 2 hours, main lobby of Wilson Shipping. Tell them Elena Martinez will be making a major announcement. And Elena Wilson. I touched the compass pendant at my neck, thinking of my grandmother. She's done hiding. The lobby was packed by the time I arrived. Reporters jostled for position, cameras flashed, and a crowd of Wilson Shipping employees lined the balconies above. My father stood with the board members on a small stage, looking like he aged a decade overnight. I made them wait 10 minutes, a small petty pleasure, but I'd earned it. When I finally walked in, the crowd fell silent. I wore Wilson blue today, a power suit that matched the company's logo, with my grandmother's compass catching the light. No more hiding behind sunglasses or Spanish accents. Thank you all for coming, I began, stepping to the podium. My name is Elena Martinez, or as some of you might remember, Elena Wilson. The room erupted. Cameras clicked frantically, reporters shouted questions, and somewhere in the crowd, I heard my mother gasp. I held up a hand for silence. 10 years ago, the Wilson family announced my tragic death, a sailing accident off the coast. The truth is somewhat less dramatic. I simply refused an arranged marriage and left to build my own life. My parents, finding this embarrassing, chose to bury an empty casket rather than admit their daughter had defied them. My father stepped forward, face dark with anger, but security, my security, held him back. In the decades since, I continued. I built what they said was impossible. Phoenix Maritime revolutionized shipping logistics, embracing modern technology while companies like Wilson Shipping clung to outdated methods. We grew rapidly, acquiring ports, properties, and clients, including many former Wilson assets. I turned to face the board members directly. Today, I'm announcing the merger of Wilson Shipping with Phoenix Maritime. The Wilson name will continue, but the company will be completely restructured. All current board members will be retiring with generous compensation packages. More chaos, more shouted questions. I noticed Olivia slip into the back of the room, still in her honeymoon tan, watching with wide eyes. And now, I said, I'll take questions. Ms. Wilson, did your family know you were alive? No. They were quite committed to my death. Ms. Martinez, how did you build your empire? The same way I would have modernized Wilson Shipping, had I been allowed, by understanding that tradition without innovation is just slow decay. Mr. Wilson, your response to your daughter's return? My father stepped forward, and for a moment I saw something crack in his proud facade. Elena, we thought. You thought I'd fail, I finished for him. That's the problem, father. You never saw who I really was. He aged another decade before my eyes. We did what we thought was right. No, I corrected quietly. You did what was easy. Erasing you was easier than admitting I might have had better ideas. Declaring me dead was easier than explaining why I left. Even now, giving up control is easier than watching your company collapse under its own weight. Elena, my mother's voice, somewhere in the crowd. Please. I ignored her, addressing the reporters again. The merged company will retain the Wilson name out of respect for its history. But make no mistake, this is a complete transformation. We're moving into the future, whether the old guard likes it or not. More questions flew, but my attention was caught by Olivia pushing through the crowd. She looked different from the polished bride of 2 days ago, younger somehow, more like the sister I remembered. You were there, she said, reaching the stage. At my wedding. You watched us all pretend to mourn me. I raised an eyebrow. Yes. I knew. Her voice dropped so only I could hear. Sometimes I'd look at old pictures and think I saw you in the background. At charity events, business functions, I thought I was going crazy. You aren't. Why didn't you tell me? Back then, when they first. Would you have kept my secret? I studied her face, seeing the answer. No, you were always their perfect daughter. The one who'd never disobey. She flinched. I was 12. Old enough to know right from wrong. I softened slightly, seeing real pain in her eyes. But young enough to be afraid of ending up like me. A tear slipped down her cheek. I missed you. The real you, not the sanitized dead sister they talked about at parties. For the first time, I felt my own composure crack. I missed you too, but I couldn't be who they wanted. I had to be myself. Ms. Martinez. A reporter's shout broke the moment. What happens to the Wilson family now? I turned back to the crowd, professional mask firmly in place. They'll retain their personal assets, those that aren't already legally mine, and receive fair compensation for their shares. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to save a company that lost its way. And the family relationships. I looked at my father, defeated on his stage, my mother crying quietly in the crowd. Olivia, torn between the sister she'd lost and the parents she'd chosen. Some things, I said quietly, can't be fixed with money or business deals. The Wilsons declared their daughter dead rather than accept her choices. That doesn't go away just because she came back successful. The press conference wound down after that. Reporters got their sound bites, photographers got their shots of the prodigal daughter triumphant, and gradually the crowd dispersed. I stayed on stage, watching my parents huddle with their lawyers while Olivia hovered uncertainly between us. Maya appeared at my elbow. The papers are ready to sign. Private conference room. I nodded. Give me a minute. When the lobby was almost empty, I walked to where my parents stood. Up close, they looked old and tired, nothing like the towering figures of my childhood. The lawyers will explain everything, I said professionally. You'll be comfortable. The house is yours for life, the vacation properties too. I'm not interested in leaving you destitute. Just powerless, my father said bitterly. Like you left me? I smiled without warmth. The difference is, I'm giving you a choice. Sign the papers, accept a comfortable retirement, maybe even try to rebuild something resembling a real family relationship. Or fight me, lose everything, and prove that pride really is more important than blood. My mother reached for my hand. I let her take it, feeling her expensive rings press into my palm. We thought we were protecting you, she whispered. The business world, it's so hard for women. I pulled away. I know exactly how hard it is. I succeeded not because of the Wilson name, but because you forced me to fight without it. Olivia stepped forward. Elena, what about me? You're my sister, I said simply. My door is open when you're ready to know me as I am, not who they wanted me to be. I turned to go, then paused. Oh, and mother, the next time you're drunk at a party in my hotel, try not to brag about how you erased your daughter. It's bad for both our reputations. The paperwork took less than an hour. Signatures were scratched, hands were shaken, and just like that, Wilson Shipping belonged to the daughter they'd buried. The company would keep its name but nothing else. New board, new methods, new future. Later that night, I stood in my office watching the Wilson ships in the harbor. Soon they'd be repainted with the Phoenix Maritime logo, upgraded with modern technology, integrated into my larger transportation network. The Wilson legacy would live on, just not in the way my parents had imagined. Maya brought a bottle of champagne. To the merger. To the truth, I corrected, taking a glass. Sometimes it takes a death to bring it to life. Your sister's been calling, she said carefully, and your grandmother's compass. I touched the pendant. Grandma knew. She left me this compass the day before I disappeared, said sometimes the right path isn't the easy one. Smart woman. She would have loved seeing this. I sipped the champagne, remembering. She always said the Wilson pride would sink us faster than any storm. My phone buzzed. Olivia again. This time I answered. Can we talk? She asked quietly. Really talked, just us? I looked out at the harbor where the Wilson ships floated in darkness. Come over. It's time you saw who your sister really is. After I hung up, I asked Maya to order dinner for two. It would be a long night of explanations, of bridging the gap between the sister who died and the woman who rose from those ashes. But maybe, just maybe, something good could come from all this. I wasn't Alana Wilson anymore. That girl had died exactly as her parents claimed. But Elena Martinez was stronger, successful beyond their wildest fears, and finally, absolutely free. The merger would save their company. The money would save their lifestyle. But the truth, that would save me. And in the end, that's what the story was really about. Not revenge, not money, not even family. It was about a girl who had to die to become who she was always meant to be. I raised my glass to the dark harbor. To Elena Wilson, I whispered, "May she rest in peace." Then I turned away from the window and went to meet my sister, ready to begin whatever came next.
The knocking started at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday, sharp and insistent against my apartment door. I was making coffee and reading through some property management reports when the sound cut through the morning quiet like an alarm. 3 quick raps, pause, 3 more raps. The pattern my father had used since I was a child when he wanted immediate attention and compliance. I set down my mug and walked to the door, already knowing this conversation wasn't going to be pleasant. Through the peephole, I could see both my parents standing in the hallway, Dad's face flushed with righteous anger, Mom clutching a manila folder against her chest like armor. "Michael, open this door right now." Dad's voice carried through the wood with the authority he'd cultivated during 30 years as a high school principal. "We need to talk." I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door to find them both dressed like they were heading to a business meeting. Dad wore his best suit, the navy one he reserved for parent-teacher conferences and church board meetings. Mom had on the dress she wore to funerals and court appearances, complete with her pearl necklace and the stern expression that had terrified my childhood friends. "Good morning," I said, stepping aside to let them enter. "Coffee. We're not here for pleasantries." Dad strode into my living room like he owned the place, Mom following with her folder held at the ready. "This is about your living situation and the family's financial obligations." The formal tone set off warning bells. When my parents adopted business language, it usually meant they'd made decisions about my life without consulting me, then prepared arguments to justify why their choices were both inevitable and beneficial. "My living situation seems fine," I said, closing the door and following them into the living room. "Rent's paid, utilities are current, neighbors are quiet." "That's exactly the problem." Dad positioned himself in the center of the room, his principal's stance that was designed to project authority and control. "You've gotten too comfortable. At 31 years old, you should be working toward homeownership, building equity, planning for your future." Mom opened her folder and pulled out what appeared to be a real estate listing. "We found you a lovely 1-bedroom condo in Riverside Heights. The mortgage payment would be less than what you're paying in rent here, and you'd be building wealth instead of throwing money away." The condo listing looked professional, complete with color photos and detailed specifications. They'd clearly spent time researching options and preparing their presentation, which meant this conversation was the culmination of weeks of planning rather than a spontaneous intervention. "I like living here," I said simply. Liking something isn't the same as making smart financial choices. Dad's voice carried the patient condescension he'd perfected during decades of explaining obvious truths to resistant teenagers. "Your mother and I have watched you waste money on rent for 8 years. 8 years, Michael. Do you have any idea how much equity you could have built by now?" Mom consulted her folder like she was referencing official documentation. "We calculated that you've paid approximately $96,000 in rent since you moved out. That money could have gone toward building real wealth through property ownership." The numbers were specific enough to suggest they'd done serious research, probably including credit checks and mortgage pre-approval calculations. My parents approached major decisions with the thoroughness of people who'd spent their careers managing budgets and long-term planning. "The rental market in this area has also become unstable," Dad continued, walking around my living room like he was conducting an inspection. "Rent increases, gentrification, building conversions. You could be forced to move at any time, and then where would you be? Probably in another apartment, I said, refilling my coffee cup. Would you like some breakfast? I have bagels. Michael, you're not taking this seriously. Mom's voice carried the frustrated tone she'd used when I was 16, and she'd discovered I hadn't applied to any of the colleges they'd pre-selected for me. We're trying to help you build a stable future. I have a stable future. Living in someone else's building, subject to their decisions about rent increases and property maintenance? Dad shook his head with the disappointed expression reserved for students who refuse to acknowledge their academic shortcomings. That's not stability. That's dependency. He walked to the window and looked down at the street below, taking in the tree-lined sidewalks and well-maintained storefronts that made this neighborhood one of the most desirable in the city. This area is nice enough, but you're paying premium prices for someone else's investment. He turned back toward me with the expression of someone delivering uncomfortable but necessary truths. The building owner is getting wealthy from your rent payments while you build nothing for yourself. The irony in his statement was so profound that I had to suppress a smile. But I'd learned over the years that correcting my parents' assumptions usually led to longer arguments and more elaborate interventions. The condo we found has everything you need, Mom said, pulling out additional paperwork from her folder. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, updated kitchen, in-unit laundry, assigned parking space. And the HOA fee covers maintenance, landscaping, and building security. The condo listing was genuinely attractive, featuring modern appliances and granite countertops in a complex that probably appealed to young professionals who wanted the appearance of homeownership without the complications of actual property management. It's a 15-minute drive from here, Dad added. Close enough that you could maintain your current routines while building equity and establishing real roots in the community. Their research was thorough and their arguments were logical, based on conventional wisdom about real estate investment and wealth building that financial advisors had been dispensing for decades. I appreciate the research, but I'm not interested in moving. Not interested or afraid of the commitment? Dad's question carried the sharp edge he'd used when challenging students who made excuses for avoiding difficult assignments. Homeownership requires responsibility, Michael. Long-term thinking. Maybe that's what's really holding you back. The accusation of immaturity was familiar territory, part of a long-running family narrative about my reluctance to embrace adult responsibilities and conventional markers of success. Or maybe you've gotten too comfortable with the easy option, Mom added, her voice gentler but carrying the same underlying message. Renting feels simpler because you don't have to worry about maintenance or property taxes or market fluctuations. But simple isn't always better, Dad said, warming to his favorite theme about the relationship between comfort and personal growth. Sometimes you need to push yourself toward challenges that will pay off in the long run. I sat down on my couch and listened to them outline their vision of my future, complete with mortgage payments, property tax schedules, and home equity loans that could fund additional investments. They'd thought through every detail of a life they believed I should want but had never asked if I actually wanted. The seller is motivated, Mom continued, consulting her notes. They've already moved to Phoenix for a job relocation, so they're open to reasonable offers and flexible closing dates. We could co-sign the mortgage if your credit score needs improvement, Dad offered. Help you get approved for better interest rates until your financial situation stabilizes. The offer of financial assistance came with the unspoken understanding that it would also come with ongoing oversight and opinions about my spending habits, career choices, and lifestyle decisions. I don't need help with my credit score, I said. Everyone can use help with something. Dad's tone suggested he knew better than I did what assistance I might require. The important thing is taking action before you get stuck in a pattern of permanent renting. Mom pulled out what appeared to be a timeline, complete with deadlines for mortgage applications, home inspections, and closing procedures. If we move quickly, you could be in your new place by the end of next month. The assumption that I would obviously want to move quickly toward their chosen solution was typical of how my parents approached major decisions involving my life. They identified problems, researched solutions, and presented conclusions as if my agreement was a formality rather than a requirement. I'm not buying a condo, I said firmly. The statement hung in the air like a challenge to everything they'd spent weeks planning and preparing. Dad's expression shifted through disappointment, frustration, and the kind of principled anger he reserved for students who refused to accept guidance that was obviously in their best interests. Michael, sometimes you have to make decisions based on logic rather than emotion. His voice carried the patient authority of someone explaining basic mathematics to a resistant child. We've done the research, run the numbers, identified the best available option. You can't just dismiss good advice because it requires change. I can dismiss advice I don't want. Want isn't the issue here. Mom's voice sharpened with the frustration of someone whose carefully prepared presentation was being rejected without proper consideration. Need is the issue. You need to start building wealth. You need to establish roots. You need to stop throwing away money on rent. What I need is for you to respect my choices about where I live. The conversation had reached the familiar inflection point where my parents' helpful suggestions transformed into demands backed by family authority and emotional pressure. Your choices haven't been particularly wise so far, Dad said, his principal's voice carrying the finality of someone delivering a judgment that couldn't be appealed. 8 years of rent payments with nothing to show for it except canceled checks and a lease agreement that could be terminated at any time. Which is why we're intervening now, Mom added, her folder still full of documentation supporting their position. Before you waste even more money on a lifestyle that builds nothing for your future. The word intervening was particularly telling, suggesting they viewed my housing situation as a crisis requiring family action rather than a personal choice deserving respect. I'm not wasting money. I'm paying for a place to live. You're paying for the privilege of making someone else wealthy, Dad corrected, walking around my apartment like he was cataloging evidence of poor decision-making. Every month, you hand over a substantial check to a landlord who uses your rent payments to build his own equity and investment portfolio. He paused at my bookshelf, scanning the titles like he was looking for clues about what had led to my obviously flawed thinking about real estate and wealth building. Do you even know who owns this building? He asked. Have you ever met the person who's getting rich from your monthly payments? The question was clearly rhetorical, designed to highlight my disconnection from the financial realities of my housing arrangement rather than gather actual information. As a matter of fact, I do know who owns this building. Some investment company probably, Mom said dismissively. Or a property management firm that owns dozens of buildings and treats tenants like numbers on a spreadsheet. Maybe a foreign investor who bought the property as a tax write-off, Dad added, his voice carrying the disdain he reserved for people who made money without what he considered honest work. Someone who doesn't care about the community or the tenants, just the monthly cash flow. Their assumptions about absentee landlords and corporate property ownership were probably accurate for many rental buildings in the area, based on news stories and financial articles about real estate investment trends. The point is, Dad continued, you're working to pay off someone else's mortgage instead of your own. You're building their wealth instead of yours. And after 8 years of this arrangement, you have nothing tangible to show for all those payments. Nothing except a place to live that I enjoy in a neighborhood I love. Enjoyment doesn't build wealth, Mom said, her tone suggesting that pursuing happiness through housing choices was a luxury that responsible adults couldn't afford. Security builds wealth. Ownership builds wealth. Equity builds wealth. She consulted her folder again, pulling out what appeared to be financial projections showing potential returns on real estate investment over various time horizons. If you'd bought property 8 years ago instead of renting, you'd have at least $40,000 in equity by now, she announced, pointing to calculations that looked professionally prepared. Maybe more, depending on market appreciation in your area. The numbers were probably accurate, based on historical real estate trends and typical mortgage amortization schedules. My parents had clearly invested significant time in building a compelling financial argument for homeownership. And in another 8 years, you'd own the property outright instead of still paying rent with nothing to show for it, Dad added. That's the difference between thinking strategically and just drifting through life without a plan. The accusation of drifting was particularly loaded, suggesting that my contentment with rental housing reflected a broader pattern of avoiding adult responsibilities and long-term commitment. I have a plan, I said quietly. Continuing to rent indefinitely isn't a plan. It's avoidance. Dad's voice carried the certainty of someone who'd spent decades counseling young people about the importance of setting goals and working systematically toward achievement. Which is why we're here, Mom said, her folder still full of documents supporting their intervention. To help you move from avoidance to action, from drifting to building something real. The conversation had evolved from helpful suggestion to family intervention, complete with research, documentation, and coordinated pressure designed to overcome my resistance to their chosen solution. The condo we found won't be available forever, Dad warned. Real estate moves quickly in desirable areas, especially properties that are priced reasonably for first-time buyers. If you wait much longer, you'll miss this opportunity and probably end up paying more for something less attractive, Mom added. The market doesn't reward hesitation. The urgency they were creating felt artificial, designed to prevent me from having time to develop counterarguments or find alternative solutions to problems I hadn't known I had until this morning. I understand you've done a lot of research, I said carefully. But I'm not interested in buying property right now. Not interested or not ready to accept adult responsibility? Dad's question was sharp, with the kind of challenge he'd used to motivate underperforming students. Because there's a difference, and it matters for how we move forward. The implication that refusing their advice indicated immaturity was familiar from years of family conversations where my choices were interpreted as character flaws rather than legitimate preferences. Maybe not ready, Mom said more gently, though her tone still carried disappointment. Which is understandable, but not something you can avoid indefinitely. Homeownership is intimidating at first, Dad acknowledged. But like most worthwhile challenges, it becomes manageable once you commit to the process and start building expertise through experience. They were offering the kind of patient encouragement that had helped me learn to drive, apply to college, and navigate other transitions from dependency to independence. The problem was that I didn't need encouragement because I wasn't facing a challenge or avoiding a responsibility. I appreciate your concern, but I'm happy with my current situation. Happiness isn't enough, Dad said firmly. You need security. You need to be building something for your future instead of just enjoying the present. What if something happens to your income? Mom added, her voice carrying the worry that had motivated decades of careful financial planning. If you own property, you have equity you can borrow against. If you're renting, you have nothing. The scenarios they painted were legitimately concerning, based on economic uncertainties and personal experiences with financial setbacks that had shaped their conservative approach to money management. Or what if the building owner decides to sell or convert to condos, or raise rents beyond what you can afford? Dad continued, outlining risks that were probably realistic given current real estate market trends. You'd have to move on someone else's timeline, maybe to a neighborhood you can't afford or don't want to live in. As a renter, you have no control over your most basic need, Mom concluded. Housing security. That's not a sustainable way to live. Their arguments were logical and their concerns were reasonable, based on conventional wisdom about the advantages of homeownership over renting. The problem was that their entire analysis was built on assumptions about my situation that were fundamentally incorrect. Actually, I said, standing up and walking to my desk, I do have housing security. I pulled out a folder from my desk drawer, one that contained documents far more official and legally binding than anything in Mom's real estate research collection. What kind of security? Dad asked, his tone suggesting skepticism about whatever explanation I was about to offer. The kind that comes with owning the building. The statement landed with the impact of information that recontextualized everything that had happened over the past hour. My parents looked at me with expressions of confusion, as if I'd just claimed something that contradicted basic facts about reality. What do you mean, owning the building? Mom asked slowly. I opened my folder and pulled out the deed, property tax records, and mortgage documentation that established my legal ownership of the 4-story brownstone we were currently sitting in. I mean, I bought this building 3 years ago through Meridian Holdings LLC. I handed them the deed, watching their faces as they processed information that made their entire intervention irrelevant. I'm not paying rent to a landlord. I'm paying myself. Dad took the document with hands that weren't quite steady, scanning the legal language that clearly established my ownership of the property they'd been encouraging me to abandon. This is impossible, Mom whispered. You work at the nonprofit. Your salary isn't enough to buy a building like this. The nonprofit salary covers my living expenses, I explained. The building generates rental income from the other 3 units that more than covers the mortgage, taxes, and maintenance. The financial dynamics of my situation were apparently completely different from what they'd assumed during their weeks of research and planning. But you never said anything, Dad said, his voice carrying the bewilderment of someone whose fundamental assumptions about my life had just been proven completely wrong. We thought you were struggling with rent payments, making poor financial choices. You thought what you wanted to think because it supported your narrative about my irresponsibility. Mom was studying the property tax records with the careful attention she'd once devoted to reviewing my report cards. Michael, this building is worth. This says it's assessed at $1.2 million. Market value is probably closer to $1.8 million now, I said matter-of-factly. Real estate appreciation has been strong in this neighborhood over the past few years. The numbers seem to hit them like physical blows, each figure contradicting months of assumptions about my financial situation and need for their guidance. Where did you get the money for a down payment? Dad asked, his principal's training evident in the way he was trying to piece together facts that didn't match his existing understanding of my resources. I saved it from my previous job in finance, before I decided I wanted to do nonprofit work. I retrieved additional documents from my folder. The building was a foreclosure property that needed renovation work, so I got it below market value. You worked in finance? Mom's voice carried the same confusion she might have shown if I'd announced I'd once been a professional athlete or foreign diplomat. For 6 years, right after college. Investment banking, then private equity. I handed her my old business cards from Goldman Sachs and Blackstone, tangible proof of a career history they'd apparently never known about. I saved most of my salary and bonuses because I knew I wanted to transition to mission-driven work eventually. The business cards seemed to mesmerize her. Physical evidence of achievements and financial resources that had somehow remained invisible during years of family conversations about my career and financial situation. But you never mentioned, we had no idea. Dad's voice trailed off as he processed the scope of information he'd missed about his own son's professional history and current financial position. You never asked about my work history. You just assumed I'd always been struggling because I chose nonprofit work over higher-paying careers. The assumption had probably seemed reasonable to them, based on stereotypes about nonprofit salaries and their observations of my modest lifestyle choices. Michael, Mom said slowly, if you own this building, why do you live so simply? Why don't you have a car or expensive furniture or any of the things wealthy people usually buy? Because I don't need those things to be happy. And because keeping my expenses low maximizes the passive income from the building. The concept of choosing simplicity despite having resources seemed to be as foreign to them as the revelation of my property ownership. But people will think, your lifestyle suggests. Mom struggled to articulate concerns about social perceptions and status signaling that had apparently motivated decades of advice about my choices. People will think I'm content with what I have instead of constantly pursuing more expensive signals of success. Dad was still studying the property documents, his expression shifting between bewilderment and what looked like the beginning of anger. Why didn't you tell us? He asked finally. Why let us worry about your financial future if you're actually wealthy? Because every time I tried to explain that I was fine, you interpreted it as denial or immaturity. I gestured toward Mom's folder of condo listings and mortgage pre-approval letters. Like today when you arrived with a complete plan for reorganizing my life based on assumptions you never verified. The truth of this observation seemed to register, though not in ways that suggested they were ready to acknowledge the pattern. We were trying to help, Mom said defensively. We thought you were throwing away money on rent and avoiding the responsibilities of homeownership. You were trying to fix problems I didn't have based on information you never gathered. The conversation was interrupted by Dad's phone ringing. He looked at the caller ID with an expression that suggested whoever was calling wasn't someone he wanted to speak with at the moment. It's your Uncle Jerry, he told Mom. He's probably calling about the eviction notice. The words hung in the air like an admission of something they'd hoped to avoid discussing. What eviction notice? I asked. Mom and Dad exchanged the kind of look that passes between people who've been caught in something they'd hoped to keep secret. Well, Dad said slowly, we may have been a bit more proactive in our approach to helping you make this transition. Proactive how? Mom opened her folder and pulled out a document that looked official and threatening, complete with legal letterhead and language about tenant rights and eviction procedures. We had Jerry draft an eviction notice, she admitted. just in case you were resistant to making the change voluntarily. I took the document and scanned its contents, noting the detailed legal language about lease violations, property sales, and mandatory vacating procedures. This says I have to vacate the premises within 24 hours due to building sale and lease termination. It's not real, Dad said quickly. Jerry just made it look official to add some urgency to your decision-making process. You created fake legal documents to force me out of my apartment? The question seemed to highlight the scope of their presumption in ways that made them both visibly uncomfortable. We thought a little pressure might help you overcome your hesitation about making a positive change, Mom explained, her voice carrying the defensive tone of someone justifying actions that sounded worse when spoken aloud. And if that didn't work, you were planning to do what exactly? Call the police, Dad admitted. Jerry said eviction enforcement requires law enforcement involvement, so we were prepared to take that step if necessary. The casual mention of involving police in their family intervention revealed a level of commitment to their plan that went far beyond helpful suggestion. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone, let's call them right now. Michael, that's not necessary, Mom said quickly. We can work this out as a family. You created fake legal documents and threatened police involvement. I think it's very necessary. I dialed 911 before they could object further, requesting officers to respond to a landlord-tenant dispute involving fraudulent eviction documents. What are you doing? Dad asked, his voice tight with the kind of panic he'd probably felt when students threatened to report his disciplinary methods to the school board. I'm letting you follow through on your plan to call the police. The 20 minutes we spent waiting for officers to arrive were among the most uncomfortable of our family history. Mom kept consulting her folder like it might contain solutions to problems she hadn't anticipated, while Dad paced around my living room with the restless energy of someone whose carefully planned intervention had spiraled beyond his control. When the officers arrived, they entered my apartment with the professional wariness that police bring to domestic disputes and family conflicts that have escalated beyond verbal disagreement. Someone called about a landlord-tenant issue? Officer Martinez asked, looking between the three of us with the practiced assessment of someone who'd responded to dozens of similar calls. Yes, I said, handing him my phone with the property deed displayed on the screen. These people are trying to evict me from my own building using fraudulent legal documents. Officer Martinez studied my phone screen, then looked at Dad with an expression that suggested he was reassessing the situation. Sir, you need to step away from the property owner immediately, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to defusing situations that could escalate into criminal charges. The transformation in the room's dynamics was immediate and profound. Dad, who had entered my apartment with the confidence of someone exercising legitimate authority, suddenly found himself being treated as a potential criminal by a police officer. There's been a misunderstanding, Dad said quickly. We're his parents. We were trying to help him make better housing decisions. By creating fake eviction documents? Officer Martinez's partner, Officer Chin, had taken the fraudulent notice from Mom's folder and was examining it with obvious skepticism. This document claims legal authority it doesn't possess. That's fraud. It wasn't meant to be taken seriously, Mom said, her voice small and defensive. We just wanted to add some urgency to encourage him to consider homeownership. Ma'am, creating false legal documents is a criminal offense regardless of your intentions, Officer Martinez explained. And attempting to use fraudulent paperwork to force someone from their home constitutes harassment and potentially criminal coercion. The legal terminology seemed to hit my parents with the force of consequences they'd never considered during their planning process. Are you pressing charges? Officer Chin asked me. I looked at my parents, who were standing in my living room with expressions of shock and dawning understanding about how far their helpful intervention had strayed from legal behavior. Not this time, I said. But I want them to understand that any future attempts to interfere with my housing situation will result in criminal charges and restraining orders. Understood, Officer Martinez said, though his tone suggested he thought I was being more generous than the situation warranted. Folks, you need to leave this property immediately and not return unless invited by the owner. But he's our son, Mom protested weakly. And he's an adult property owner who can make his own decisions about housing and visitors, Officer Chin replied. Family relationships don't give you the right to create fraudulent documents or threaten illegal evictions. My parents gathered their belongings with the careful movements of people who were still processing how dramatically their mourning had diverged from their planned family intervention. At the door, Dad turned back one final time. "Michael, we really were trying to help. We thought you needed guidance about building wealth and planning for the future. What I needed was for you to ask about my actual situation instead of making assumptions based on limited information. We had no idea about your financial resources or property ownership," Mom added. "You live so modestly, we thought you were struggling. Living modestly when you have resources is called financial discipline. It's what allows people to build wealth instead of just displaying it." The concept seemed to be genuinely foreign to them, contradicting decades of assumptions about the relationship between wealth and lifestyle choices. After they left, I sat in my living room drinking coffee and reviewing the property documents that had transformed their carefully planned intervention into a lesson about the dangers of making assumptions without gathering facts. The building around me was quiet except for the normal sounds of daily life from my tenants, people who paid me rent that covered my mortgage while allowing me to live exactly as I chose without anyone's permission or approval. Over the following weeks, I had several conversations with my parents about boundaries, assumptions, and the difference between offering advice and imposing solutions. They were embarrassed by their use of fraudulent documents and police threats, though they continued to struggle with understanding why someone with significant resources would choose to live simply. Eventually, we reached an understanding that allowed us to maintain a relationship while respecting my autonomy over housing and financial decisions. But it took months for them to stop suggesting ways I could better utilize my property investment or maximize my wealth-building potential. The condo they'd selected for me sold to another buyer within a week, probably to someone whose parents had successfully convinced them that homeownership was the key to adult respectability and financial security. My building continued to appreciate in value while generating steady rental income, providing exactly the kind of financial security my parents had been worried about, just achieved through methods they'd never considered or understood. Sometimes the best investment strategy is building wealth quietly while living simply, regardless of what other people assume about your financial situation or their opinions about how you should display success. The fraudulent eviction notice now hangs framed in my office as a reminder that good intentions combined with wrong assumptions can lead to remarkably bad decisions, and that sometimes the most important thing family members can do is ask questions before offering solutions.